welcome to the Dibley Diaries for this week. This week we're going to be thinking about the beginning of Mark 8:31 to 34, and in particular the bit where Jesus and Peter have a conversation when Jesus is trying to explain that he is going to need to die and rise again. But what I particularly wanted to think about this week was about things that are broken and what it means when things are broken, and that sometimes actually things that are broken can be put together in a special way and a different way. And the rural challenge that I wanted to think about was that actually how does that apply to us in our church communities? So this week I was in one of our church buildings which has a stained glass window which is made out of the bits of broken window that have been rescued and found and put back together again. So they're bits of really ancient window that were broken probably in the 17th century as part of the whole kind of anti-image movement in the church, and they were just left to be kind of absorbed into the churchyard. And plenty of our rural churches have places where those have been dug up again, and then they've been put together and made into a new and different window. I mean, we might not ever say it's a better window, but there are lots of examples where things which are broken and put together again are better than the original, and we only need to think about mosaics for that, which is the kind of symbolism of the story, and we'll return to that. But actually, what happens when things go wrong in church communities? How does that become a time when we can move from brokenness to something which is better, which is perhaps even the way that God has been calling us all along? Recently, one of the church buildings in our benefice was shut for repairs, and that meant that actually we had to think about where the church services were going to be, and one of those ended up being a shared church service with a geographically very close community that met in a separate one of our church buildings, which was a lovely occasion, actually a coming together of people. And one of the other Sundays we had a service where we were all gathered together anyway. We'd been planning that for a little while, but that worked really well, so that was with a bigger group of people. And then one of the other Sundays was a Sunday that we are anyway meeting instead of in the church building but in the school hall. So actually what would have been a disaster, the church building is shut, was turned into something new and special and gave us the opportunity to explore different things and probably to do some discerning about the way that God was calling us. It can be a pain if we think about our actual physical buildings, that we aren't given very much flexibility in some ways. If they're listed about actually if something's broken and we want to change it, what could we change it into? There's some frustrations about constraints in that, but also just if the way that we work we're being challenged to do in a different way, that's important for us to think, well, what is God calling us to? This bit seems to be broken, but what does that mean God is calling us to do in a different way or a new way? So today in Thought for the Week we are thinking about things which are broken and things which need fixing. They do say that an engineer only needs two things. If something is broken you need gaffer tape, and if something won't move you need WD-40. But that's not really the kind of engineering that we're thinking about today. But it starts us in a place of, actually, do you fix things? If you gaffer tape something together, will it work? To be fair, gaffer taping stuff together often works for quite a while, but that's not really what we're thinking about today. Today we're thinking about what happens when something is broken and then God puts it back together again. And Jesus in Mark 8:31-32 is explaining to the disciples that he needs to die and be raised to life on the third day. So Jesus is saying this is going to be broken and this is how it's going to be fixed. Peter doesn't get it. Peter is just takes Jesus to one side and says, this can't happen, this can't be the right thing to happen. This is going to be bringing us to a position of brokenness. Peter does not understand what putting things back together again is going to be like. He doesn't understand what the resurrection is going to bring about. And Jesus is really cross with him and says, "Get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, Satan." And that's quite a cutting thing to say to one of your best friends. Peter and Jesus have a very rocky relationship, and at this point it's pretty broken. But we'll come to find out later on in the Easter story about how it's going to be put together again. Often when we think about God putting things back together again, we can think of some examples. We can think of the Japanese tradition that when something beautiful, which is ceramic, is broken, you would fix it with gold, and the gold would hold it together but also make it more beautiful. And sometimes I like to think about mosaics, because mosaics are made from things which wouldn't be possible to make a mosaic unless something was broken. And if you have a cup and then a mended cup, that's the same thing, but a mosaic is something which you can't make unless something is broken first. Peter and Jesus' relationship will be up and down and up and down. We might think of this as the low point, but there are other places where you might nominate them to be a low point in Peter and Jesus' relationship. Jesus isn't very pleased when Peter cuts off a guard's ear, for example, or particularly Peter feels really distraught when on the night of Jesus' arrest and he denies knowing Jesus. That's pretty broken. But what happens to that relationship when it's touched by the resurrection power of Jesus? What happens to it? So when we think about what happens with Jesus' death and resurrection, we think about words to do with victory and to do triumph and to do with sacrifice. And I'm also minded of the gravestone in a Tripoli Commonwealth War Graves site, where someone has put on the gravestone as a memorial to their son, "Into the mosaic of victory I place this most precious piece, my dearest son. Into the mosaic of victory I place this most precious piece, my dearest son." And God does that. God places Jesus into the mosaic of cosmic victory, of resurrection. But where does that leave Jesus and Peter with their fractured relationship, which has been broken and mended and broken and mended and broken and mended? Well, where it leaves them eventually is to a lakeside where the resurrected Jesus cooks for the disciples. He makes them bread and fish, and then he takes Peter to one side and says, "I want you to look after all the others. You're to feed my sheep." And they have this discussion, and Jesus confirms that this is actually what he's saying 3 times, and leads Peter into church leadership, which is great because Peter can't have been any more broken than he was in his relationship with Jesus on many occasions. But Jesus is saying, well, this is what the resurrection has done. It has turned all this brokenness into wholeness and to perhaps even a better situation for Peter than Peter would have had before without that experience, but a possibility for all of us. Peter now understands that the resurrection was God's plan. He's not speaking to Jesus that the resurrection was a bad idea. He understands that the resurrection was God's plan to reconcile everybody to him. The Dibley moment for the week this week is something which happened to me before a Christmas Eve service. We were gathering in the late afternoon and I received a phone call about 20 minutes before the service was about to begin to say that the door was jammed shut and they couldn't get the lock open to open the vestry door in the church building. Unfortunately, behind the vestry door were all the light switches, and we were about to have a service which we were expecting to be pretty well attended, and at the time we had no way to switch the lights or the heating on. I packed all the things I needed for my service into my bag and a can of WD-40 and got to the church building. As I arrived with my can of WD-40, I saw someone had got there just before me and had managed to use their WD-40 to in fact unlock the door so we could switch on the lights, and that was good because actually the church service had more people than I'd ever remembered in that church building. So fortunately having some lights, so something which was stuck, needed fixing, and not something that we had to gaffer tape together. That would have been a very different sort of issue. That's it for the Dibley Diaries this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week, and that something which is broken can get put together and transformed into something new and better this week.